A girl disappeared during what should have been a normal holiday with her dad and older brother, while her mother, who had stayed at home, was left devastated and searching for answers. Everyone suspected she had been abducted, but no one truly knew what had occurred. Then, 10 years later, her older brother reveals the shocking truth about what really happened on that trip with their dad. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to flicker more intensely at this late hour. Or perhaps it was just Rena Marlowe's exhaustion playing tricks on her perception. At 43, she felt at least a decade older as she signed off her charts at the nurse's station. Her colleagues waved goodnight as she gathered her things, her body moving on autopilot after an 11-hour shift. "See you tomorrow, Rena," called one of the younger nurses. "Bright and early," Rena replied, though there was nothing bright about starting her morning shift at the playgroup before returning to the hospital in the afternoon. But bills didn't pay themselves, and single-handedly supporting a family of 3, well, 2 now, required sacrifices. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, a welcome coolness after the sterile warmth of the hospital. The bus was late, as usual, giving her mind unwelcome time to wander. 10 years. 10 years since her daughter Lila disappeared on that family vacation in Egypt. 10 years of searching, pleading, praying. 10 years of a husband slowly deteriorating into a shell of himself, drowning his guilt in alcohol. 10 years of watching her son Tommy grow up with the shadow of his sister's absence hanging over him. When the bus finally arrived, Rena took a seat by the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass as suburban houses blurred past. By the time she reached her stop, it was nearly 11 p.m. The darkened windows told their own story. No one had waited up for her. The front door creaked as she entered, the silence of the house enveloping her immediately. She moved quietly through the darkened living room, her nurse's training making her steps light and deliberate. Pausing at Tommy's door, she gently pushed it open, the dim light from the hallway casting a thin stripe across his sleeping form. At 20, he still slept curled slightly on his side, just as he had as a child. She resisted the urge to brush the dark hair from his forehead, not wanting to disturb him. Upstairs in the master bedroom, Rena set her nursing bag down on the dressing table, methodically unpacking her stethoscope, pens, and ID badge. The empty bed didn't surprise her. Rick was out again, undoubtedly at one of the local bars. She sighed deeply, the weight of her exhaustion settling into her bones. After a quick shower that did little to ease her muscle tension, Rena changed into an old t-shirt and comfortable pants. She checked her phone, typing a quick message to Rick. "Where are you?" "It's late." She knew there would likely be no response, but the ritual of checking in had become a habit she couldn't break. Settling at the small desk in the corner of the bedroom, Rena opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her tired face as she logged into her email, checking for any new messages from the various missing persons forums and groups she'd joined over the years. Most were spam or well-intended, but useless tips that led nowhere. Still, she scrolled through them meticulously, as she did every night. As she conducted her nightly research, guilt gnawed at her core, a familiar, constant companion. If only she hadn't been working that day. If only she had joined them on that vacation from the beginning. Her second job as a playgroup teacher had been relatively new then, taken on when Rick's military disability benefits were reduced. They needed the extra income, and she thought the vacation would be good for Rick, a chance for him to bond with the children away from his mounting depression. It will be therapeutic, his therapist had suggested, and Rena had agreed. A chance to reset, Elena, their family friend, had echoed. She was supposed to join them later that week, but an emergency at the hospital had kept her. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been saving strangers' lives in the ER, her own daughter had vanished without a trace. Rena rubbed her throbbing temples, closing her eyes against the glare of the screen. The burden she carried seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, not lighter as people promised grief would become. She worked endlessly, trying to provide some semblance of stability for what remained of her family. Though Tommy had started working at the local supermarket, she insisted he save his earnings for his future. She wouldn't let her son's prospects diminish because of their circumstances. The sound of the front door opening downstairs pulled her from her thoughts. Heavy footsteps made their uneven way up the stairs, and moments later Rick appeared in the doorway. His once handsome face was bloated from years of drinking, his military-trained physique long since softened. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes clung to him. "Still at it," he slurred, gesturing toward the laptop. "Don't you ever give up?" Rena closed the screen partially, already bracing herself for the argument that was sure to follow. "You're drunk again." "So what if I am?" Rick leaned against the doorframe, his balance uncertain. "You left Tommy alone," she said, her voice tight with contained anger. Rick scoffed. "He's 20, for Christ's sake. Not a child. He can manage to be home alone. Probably even likes the freedom." "No one likes to be alone, Rick." Rena stood, her fatigue momentarily forgotten in the face of her mounting frustration. "You're not working. The least you could do while I spend all my energy earning money for this family is spend some quality time with your son rather than wasting my hard-earned money on alcohol." "Here we go again." Rick rolled his eyes. "The martyr speech?" "If you had saved all the money you've spent on beer over the years, I could probably afford to go to Egypt and search for Lila myself." Rick's expression darkened. "It's been 10 years, Rena. 10 years? You won't find her even if you went there." "You're too drunk for this conversation," Rena said, turning away from him. "You were probably drunk that evening too, weren't you? When Lila disappeared? It was your fault. You were there with her, and you didn't keep an eye on her." Rick's face contorted with anger. "Don't you dare blame me. That girl just left the hotel and never came back. We were together spending the whole day at the beach, but she had to disappear by herself in the evening. Tommy was there in the hotel too, so I can't be the only one responsible." "Tommy was only 10. Rena's voice rose. "You can't expect a child to keep an eye on his 8-year-old sister all the time." The argument escalated rapidly, both of them hurling accusations fueled by a decade of unresolved grief and resentment. Rena felt her control slipping, the careful facade she maintained crumbling under the weight of her exhaustion and Rick's belligerence. "I'm done with this," she finally said, moving toward the door. "I'm sleeping downstairs tonight." But as she tried to pass him, Rick grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight. "Don't you walk away from me," he growled, his eyes narrowed. "You will show me some respect." "Let go of me," Rena said, her voice low and dangerous. "You don't deserve any respect for being a drunkard." "I'm an ex-military man," Rick shouted, pushing her back against the wall with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. He raised his hand, and Rena flinched, preparing for the blow. But it never came. A sound from the hallway made them both freeze. Tommy stood in the doorway of his room downstairs, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light, witnessing the entire confrontation. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken tension. Then Rick released her, storming into the bedroom and slamming the door behind him. The distinct click of the lock followed. Rena leaned against the wall for a moment, trying to steady her breathing before descending the stairs to her son. When she reached him, she wrapped her arms around him, her maternal instinct overriding her own distress. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," she whispered. Tommy's face was grim, his jaw tight. "You can sleep in my bedroom tonight," he said. "It's big enough and I don't mind. I can sleep on the sofa." "No, sweetheart. You sleep in your room. I'll stay here in the living room." She attempted a reassuring smile. "I don't think I could sleep right now anyway." Tommy frowned. "I'm scared he might come after you again if he sees you sleeping on the sofa." Rena looked at her son, no longer a boy, but a young man with eyes too old for his years, and nodded. "Okay, thank you." "Did he hit you?" Tommy asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. "No," Rena assured him, touching his cheek gently. Everything is fine. How was your therapy session today? Tommy shrugged, clearly unwilling to elaborate. Fine, same as always. Rena followed him into his bedroom, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she felt. You're right, I should sleep. I have the morning shift at the playgroup tomorrow, and then the hospital in the afternoon. They said good night, and Tommy left to settle on the living room sofa. Rena closed the bedroom door and sank onto her son's bed, the familiar scent of his laundry detergent surrounding her. As she lay there in the darkness, her thoughts drifted to how drastically their lives had changed. Rick had been injured during his military deployment, a severe shrapnel injury to his right leg from an IED explosion that resulted in partial loss of mobility and chronic nerve pain. He had undergone multiple surgeries, including a metal rod implant, which had drained their savings and strained their finances severely. On top of the physical injuries, he had been diagnosed with PTSD, which he continually used as a reason why he could no longer work. Over the years, his condition worsened. Staying at home with no purpose or structure only deepened his depression and dependency on alcohol. Rena's tears dampened the pillow as she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her circumstances. A missing daughter, a broken husband, a son bearing scars she couldn't see, and the exhaustion of holding it all together with increasingly frayed strength. Rena jolted awake to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then recognized Tommy's bedroom. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and felt her heart drop as she saw the time. 10 a.m. She had completely missed her morning shift at the playgroup. No, she muttered, sitting up too quickly and feeling a rush of dizziness. She checked her notifications and saw 3 missed calls and a message from the school principal asking why she hadn't shown up or called in. Panic seized her as she jumped out of bed. The playgroup class ran from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., which meant she had completely missed it. She quickly typed a reply to the principal, promising to come to the school to explain the situation in person. Rena hurried out of Tommy's room and scanned the empty house. The sofa where Tommy had slept was vacant, the blanket neatly folded. He must have left for his supermarket job already. She checked the master bedroom upstairs, finding it similarly deserted. There was no sign of Rick, though the lingering smell of stale alcohol remained. She changed into fresh clothes, foregoing a shower to save time, and hurried to catch the bus to the school. Her mind raced with worry about her job security. She couldn't afford to lose any income, especially with Rick contributing nothing. As the bus approached the school, Rena spotted the principal, Mr. Daniels, locking the school gate. She rushed toward him, her heart pounding. "Mr. Daniels, I'm so sorry about this morning," she called out. The principal turned, his expression a mixture of concern and professional composure. "Rena, I was worried when you didn't show up. It's not like you to miss work without notice." "I know, and I'm truly sorry." Rena tried to catch her breath. "There was a situation at home last night, and I somehow slept through my alarm." Mr. Daniels studied her face. "You know, Rena, I've been meaning to talk to you about your schedule. Working 8 hours every evening at the hospital, plus this morning job, and I know you pick up weekend shifts at that restaurant, too. It's just too much. I was wondering when something like this would happen." Rena felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with the fear of losing her position. "I know it seems like a lot, but I can manage it. Today was just—" Mr. Daniels held up a hand. "Tell you what, I won't count it against you this time. Consider it a day off, but I want you to think about managing your schedule better. The children need a teacher who's alert and present." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I promise this won't happen again." As the principal got into his car and drove away, Rena checked the time. She had several hours before her 2 p.m. shift at the hospital, an unexpected pocket of free time in her normally packed schedule. A sudden idea came to her. She could surprise Tommy with lunch at his workplace. It had been ages since they'd shared a meal without Rick's brooding presence. She headed toward the market area to pick up ingredients for a simple lunchbox, taking a moment to send Tommy a text about her plan. As she walked, Rena decided to cut through a series of alleyways that would shorten her route to the market. The narrow passages were nearly empty in the late morning, the buildings on either side casting cool shadows. She was about halfway through when movement ahead caught her attention. From a distance, she saw a young man in bright yellow shoes and a black hoodie talking with a blonde woman wearing minimal clothing despite the daytime hour. Two men in black sunglasses and leather jackets stood nearby, their stances suggesting they were involved in the conversation. Rena slowed her pace, something about the young man's posture striking her as familiar, though his back was to her. She couldn't see his face, but something about those yellow shoes tugged at her memory. The exchange between them looked like some kind of transaction, money or small packages changing hands. She couldn't be sure from this distance. Suddenly, one of the men in leather jackets noticed her watching. He nudged his companion, and both men turned to stare at her. "What are you looking at, lady?" one of them shouted, his tone unmistakably threatening. Rena immediately turned around, her heart racing as she quickened her steps back toward the main street. Her instinct was to call the police, but what would she say? She hadn't gotten a clear view of what they were doing, and nobody seemed to be in immediate danger. After everything that had happened with Rick the night before, she didn't think she had the emotional energy to deal with this potential threat to herself and Tommy. As she emerged onto the busy main street, Rena tried to calm her nerves. Those yellow shoes kept nagging at her mind. Where had she seen them before? She couldn't place it, but the feeling of familiarity was unmistakable. Her appetite for shopping now gone, Rena pulled out her phone and texted Tommy directly. "Would you like to have lunch together today?" "I have some free time before my shift." She waited for a reply, but none came immediately. Sighing, Rena decided to head home. Perhaps she could use this unexpected time to catch up on some chores or rest before her hospital shift. The house was quiet when Rena returned. Heading upstairs to the master bedroom, Rena opened the windows to air out the lingering smell of alcohol. The room needed a thorough cleaning, and she decided to start by changing the bedding. The king-sized bed had been a wedding gift from a wealthy friend 15 years ago, an extravagant piece of furniture that seemed almost out of place in their modest home. Rena stripped off the sheets and comforter, then tried to move the heavy mattress to better reach the fitted sheet. As she pushed against it, straining with the effort, she placed one leg on the underbed to give herself more leverage. That's when she noticed something odd. A section in the middle of the underbed looked different from the rest of the fabric. Looking closer, she could see what appeared to be a seam where the material had been cut and then sewn back together. "What in the world?" she murmured, running her fingers along the uneven stitching. Curiosity overcoming her, Rena went to her sewing kit and retrieved a small pair of scissors. She knew she might be ruining an expensive piece of furniture, but something compelled her to investigate. Carefully, she cut along the line of stitches, pulling back the fabric to reveal the cotton stuffing inside. As she dug through the fluffy material, her fingers brushed against something smooth and flat. Pulling back more cotton, she discovered several photographs hidden within the underbed. With trembling hands, she extracted them one by one. The photos were from the family vacation in Egypt 10 years ago, the trip from which Lila never returned. One photograph in particular caught her attention. Rick crouched on one knee on a sandy beach, Tommy on his right and Lila on his left. Both children were smiling. Rena turned the photo over and felt her breath catch. Written on the back was what appeared to be a set of coordinates. She quickly looked through the other photos, which showed various tourist sites around Egypt. On the back of a photo taken in the desert was what looked like a phone number, not a U.S. format, likely an Egyptian number. Her heart pounding, Rena took pictures of the damaged underbed with her phone, documenting the hiding place. Then she hastily changed the bed cover and pushed the heavy bed back into position. She didn't bother to sew the underbed back together, deciding she would deal with it later. Taking the photographs to the desk, Rena's mind raced with questions. Why had Rick hidden these photos? What significance did these coordinates and phone number hold? She picked up her phone and called Detective Mercer, who had handled Lila's case, but the call went straight to voicemail. She checked her messages and saw that Tommy had finally replied, saying he would wait for her at the supermarket in an hour during his lunch break. Rena quickly texted back, "Something's come up. I found a clue, but I'll see you there and tell you about it later." Turning to her laptop, Rena typed the coordinates from the back of the beach photo into a search engine. The result showed a location in the center of Gifton Island, off the coast of Hurghada, Egypt. She compared the sandy beach in the photo to images of Gifton Island beaches online. They matched perfectly. Why would he mark this specific location? She whispered to herself. Was this just to remember where the photo was taken, or is this where Lila is? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She looked at the phone number on the other photo, debating whether to call it. Curiosity won out, and with shaking fingers she dialed the international number. The line rang 3 times before a man answered. The voice spoke in heavily accented English. "Yes? Who is this?" Panic seized Rena, and she immediately ended the call, nearly dropping her phone in the process. She searched the number online but found no relevant information. "What are you hiding, Rick?" she muttered, staring at the photos spread before her. With Detective Mercer not answering her call, Rena decided she needed to take these potential pieces of evidence to the police station herself. She carefully gathered the photographs, placed them in her handbag, and headed downstairs, her mind spinning with possibilities. As she reached for the front door, Rena paused, looking at the time. She should still have time to show these to the police and then meet Tommy for lunch before her hospital shift. Rena walked briskly toward the police station, the weight of the photographs in her bag feeling much heavier than their physical presence warranted. Her mind churned with questions and half-formed theories, each more disturbing than the last. About 15 minutes into her journey, she found herself passing the Rusty Anchor, a bar she knew Rick frequented. As if conjured by her thoughts, the door swung open, and Rick himself emerged, his face twisted in an expression of agitation. He stopped short when he saw her, genuine surprise registering in his bloodshot eyes. "Rena, what are you doing here?" he asked, glancing around suspiciously. "Thought you'd be at home getting ready for work." Rena's mouth went dry. She hadn't prepared for this confrontation, not here, not now. Her hand instinctively tightened on her bag, acutely aware of its incriminating contents. I'm going to visit Tommy," she lied, avoiding his gaze. "We're planning to have lunch together." Rick narrowed his eyes, studying her face. "Oh, yeah? You sure about that?" There was something unsettling in his tone, a dangerous undercurrent that made the hair on the back of Rena's neck stand up. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't get a chance to talk to Tommy this morning. I overslept, so I thought I'd surprise him." Rick nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I was just on my way home," he said, taking a step closer to her. "Why don't we have lunch together instead, just the two of us? We can order delivery and eat at home before your shift." "I can't," Rena said, taking a cautious step back. "Not after what happened last night. I promised Tommy. He's waiting for me, and—" Before she could finish, Rick's hand shot out, gripping her arm with painful intensity. "Tommy will understand," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Come with me, Rena." There was no request in his words, only command. Rena felt a flutter of panic as Rick began guiding her back toward their house, his grip unyielding. She considered calling out to passers-by, but what would she say? That her husband wanted her to come home? It would sound ridiculous, and the last thing she needed was public drama that might lead to questions about the photographs. As if reading her thoughts, Rick leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't make this difficult. not here. They walked in tense silence, Rick's hand never leaving her arm. As they reached their house, Rick unlocked the door and practically pushed her inside before securing the deadbolt behind them. "Rick, what is this about?" Rena demanded, rubbing her arm where his fingers had dug in. "Why did you lock the door? I need to go and meet Tommy." Instead of answering, Rick advanced toward her with deliberate steps. In one fluid motion, he yanked her handbag from her shoulder and emptied its contents onto the floor. Items scattered across the hardwood, her wallet, keys, phone, and the damning photographs from the underbed. Time seemed to slow as Rick bent down to retrieve the photos, his movements almost casual. He straightened, flipping through them with an eerie calmness before breaking into a hollow laugh. A hollow laugh escaped him, echoing unnaturally in the silent house. "Man's right. Seems like you've found this," he said, his voice unnervingly soft. "What about those photos?" Rena asked, backing away from him. "I found them in the underbed," Rick finished for her, his eyes never leaving the photographs. "I know. I put them there." Rena continued backing away until she hit the wall. "How do you know? And what's that coordinate? What's the phone number on the back?" Rick's smile sent a chill through her. "I think you've already figured it out, haven't you? Gifton Island. You always were thorough with your research." He held up the photos. "Someone I trusted on that island contacted me just now. Said a U.S. number called him. When he sent me the number, it was yours, Rena." His eyes flickered to her phone on the floor. "That's how I know you found the photos, and I'm guessing you were on your way to the police station, not to see Tommy. If you were going to Tommy, you would have taken the bus." Rena's heart hammered against her ribs as Rick closed the distance between them. "What about that coordinate?" she pressed, desperate to keep him talking. "Why hide the photos? What happened to Lila?" Instead of answering, Rick's hand shot out, wrapping around her throat. Rena's eyes widened in shock as his fingers tightened, cutting off her air supply. She clawed at his hand, gasping for breath. "Please," she choked out, "I'm your wife. We still have a son." Rick's expression remained cold, unmoved by her pleas. Rena's vision began to blur at the edges as her lungs screamed for oxygen. Suddenly, her phone on the floor began to ring, its cheerful tone incongruously bright in the grim moment. Rena struggled to speak, her words barely audible. "It must be Tommy. I promised. Lunch." The persistent ringtone seemed to agitate Rick. His eyes darted to the phone, his grip on Rena's throat momentarily loosening. Then, without warning, his face contorted, and he released her entirely, stumbling backward with his hands pressed against his ears. Rena collapsed to her knees, coughing and gulping air. She crawled toward her phone, but Rick recovered quickly. He lunged forward, snatching the phone just as she reached for it. He jabbed the end call button, silencing the ringtone. "No police," he growled, his breathing ragged. "No Tommy. No one?" Before Rena could react, Rick grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the garage. From a drawer, he produced a zip tie and bound her wrists, then used a shop rag to gag her. With surprising strength, he shoved her into the back seat of their old car, the vehicle they rarely used to save on gas. "I won't let you give that photo to the police," he muttered as he slammed the door. Rick climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, his movements jerky and erratic. As the garage door opened and the car reversed onto the street, Rena's mind raced with the horrifying realization that her husband, the father of her children, was capable of far worse than she had ever imagined. The drive was a disorienting blur for Rena. With her hands bound and mouth gagged, she could only watch through the window as familiar neighborhoods gave way to parts of town she rarely visited. Eventually, Rick turned down a side street and parked behind a shabby-looking building with a neon sign reading "The Last Call." The name sent a chill through Rena that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't one of Rick's usual haunts. She had made it her business to know those places, had even visited some to bring him home on particularly bad nights. This place was unknown territory, which could only mean he had deliberately kept it separate from his regular life. Rick cut the engine, the sudden silence pressing against Rena's ears. He turned in his seat, studying her with detached interest, as if she were a problem to be solved rather than his wife of 20 years. "We're going inside," he said finally, his voice emotionless. "If you try to signal anyone or make any noise, I'll tell them you're having a psychotic episode. Who do you think they'll believe? A decorated veteran or the overworked wife who's been obsessing over a decade-old disappearance?" The casual cruelty of the question stole what little fight remained in Rena. She had spent years defending him to doctors, to friends, to Tommy, insisting that beneath the PTSD and alcoholism remained the good man she had married. Now she wondered if that man had ever existed at all. Rick exited the driver's side and circled to the rear door. When he opened it, daylight spilled across Rena's face, temporarily blinding her after the dimness of the car interior. He grasped her arm, fingers digging into the same bruises he had created earlier, and pulled her from the vehicle. "Don't make a scene," he warned, his breath hot against her ear. The smell of whiskey and something medicinal, perhaps the pills he claimed never to take, made her stomach turn. Rick guided her through a back entrance, his grip painful on her bound arms. The interior was dimly lit, with the stale smell of cigarettes and cheap liquor hanging in the air. Despite the early hour, several men sat at a worn bar, while others lounged in booths along the wall. They barely looked up as Rick entered with his bound wife, suggesting this wasn't the first unusual sight they'd witnessed here. A tall man with a shaved head and multiple tattoos crossing his neck approached them. He wore an expensive watch that seemed at odds with the dingy surroundings. "Rick," he acknowledged with a nod, his eyes assessing Rena coldly. "This is her?" "I've had enough of this woman," Rick declared, pushing Rena forward slightly. "Deal with her, quick and no mess." Rena's eyes widened as understanding crashed over her. This wasn't just about preventing her from going to the police. Rick intended for her to disappear permanently. She tried to scream through the gag, the sound emerging as a muffled whimper that drew no attention from the other patrons. The tattooed man took hold of her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle compared to Rick's bruising force. His fingertips were calloused, his palms warm and dry against her clammy skin. "Take her to the back," called a heavy-set man from behind the bar, his focus never leaving the glass he was polishing with a dingy rag. As the tattooed man guided her away, Rena twisted her head back, desperate for one last look at Rick. She saw another man approach him, leaning in close to ask, "You want the usual girl?" Rick's response floated clearly across the room, his voice lighter now that the burden of her presence was being removed. "Yes, with something to take my mind off all this." He reached into his jacket, producing a thick envelope that he handed to the bartender with practiced ease. The man peered inside, whistling low at the contents before tucking it beneath the counter. "What a good use of your wife's money," the man laughed. "You sure you want to get rid of her? You're losing your ATM." "Don't ask, just do it," Rick snapped, already turning toward a doorway on the opposite side of the room, where a young blonde woman in a tight dress waited, her expression vacant. The tattooed man guided Rena down a narrow hallway to a small, windowless room containing only a metal chair and a cabinet. He pushed her into the chair and secured her legs with more zip ties, working quickly and efficiently. Despite her terror, Rena studied his face carefully, determined that if by some miracle she survived this, she would be able to identify him to the police. As he straightened to his full height, recognition struck her like lightning. This was one of the men in leather jackets she had seen earlier that day in the alley during her shortcut to the market. But who was the man wearing the bright yellow shoes? Certainly not Rick. Once she was securely bound to the chair, the man straightened and looked directly into her eyes for the first time. What she saw there confused her. Not the cold detachment of a killer for hire, but something softer, almost apologetic. His expression changed, the hardness melting from his features as he pressed a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. From his pocket he withdrew a smartphone, its screen cracked at one corner, but the display still bright in the dim room. After tapping the screen several times, he turned it to show her. On the display was a banking app showing a transaction record with an amount that made Rena's eyes widen in shock. Easily 5 figures, more money than she could save in a year of double shifts. But it was the name on the transaction that truly stole her breath. Tommy Marlowe. Her son. He had paid this man. The pieces started falling into place, forming a picture she didn't want to believe. The bright yellow shoes, of course, they were Tommy's. That's why they had felt so familiar. As the realization settled over her like a leaden blanket, Rena felt tears welling in her eyes, not for herself, but for her son. What had Rick done to drive Tommy to such desperate measures, and what would become of her boy if this plan succeeded? The tattooed man switched off his phone, sliding it back into his pocket. He moved to the cabinet against the wall, his movements deliberate as he extracted a key from around his neck and unlocked the metal doors. Inside, mounted on hooks and organized with military precision, was an arsenal that made Rena's blood run cold. Handguns of various calibers, boxes of ammunition stacked neatly, what appeared to be a disassembled rifle on the bottom shelf. The man selected a revolver, its blue-black finish absorbing what little light reached it. With practiced movements, he opened the cylinder, showing Rena that it contained a single bullet. He spun the cylinder, the metallic clicks echoing in the small room like a macabre countdown. "1 bullet," he said quietly. "For your husband, from Tommy." Rena shook her head frantically, making muffled sounds of protest behind her gag. Her eyes pleaded with the man, trying to communicate what her voice couldn't. "Don't do this. Not in my son's name." Before the man could respond, the door opened. Tommy stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He wore jeans and a hoodie, and on his feet were the bright yellow shoes Rena had glimpsed in the alley earlier that day. "Mom," he breathed, his voice cracking on the single syllable. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees beside the chair. His fingers, trembling slightly, worked at the knot of the gag. The cloth fell away, and Rena gasped as fresh air touched her dry mouth. "I'm so sorry they had to restrain you like this," Tommy said, not meeting her eyes as he began working on the zip ties binding her wrists. "It's just to make sure you wouldn't fight back and ruin the plan. I didn't want that, but Jerome insisted it was necessary." The tattooed man, Jerome apparently, gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. "I'm also sorry for what I'm about to do," Tommy continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I can't let him hurt you again. If he brought you here, that means only one thing. He wanted to get rid of you permanently." As blood rushed painfully back into her freed hands, Rena grabbed Tommy's arm. "No," she said hoarsely. "Tommy, listen to me. If the police find out about this, they'll put you in prison. You can't do this." Tommy's face hardened. "I don't care. After everything Dad did, I just want him gone." "What do you mean?" Rena searched her son's face. "Tommy, what are you talking about?" "The truth is too painful, Mom," Tommy whispered, his eyes haunted. Jerome, who had been standing by silently, his presence almost forgotten in the intensity of the moment between mother and son, stepped forward. "Your dad's upstairs with that woman," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now's the right time if we're going to do this." Tommy nodded, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of youth. He reached for the gun in Jerome's hand, his expression set with terrible determination. In that moment, time seemed to slow for Rena. She saw her son, her beautiful, sensitive boy who had once refused to step on ants and had cried when his sister's tooth fell out, reaching for a weapon with the intention of becoming a killer. In his face, she saw not just hatred for his father, but a lifetime of pain she had somehow failed to protect him from. The realization galvanized her. Moving faster than either man anticipated, Rena lunged toward Tommy, her muscles protesting after their confinement. Her fingers closed around his phone, which was protruding slightly from his hoodie pocket. "Mom, what?" Tommy began, but Rena had already pressed the SOS button, the one they had configured years ago after Lila's disappearance, a feature that automatically dialed 911 and sent the phone's location to emergency services. "No!" Tommy shouted, trying to grab the phone back. The device began its connection sequence, a female voice announcing, "Emergency services have been contacted. Please stay on the line." The tattooed man cursed loudly. "Deal's off," he declared, quickly unloading the gun and shoving it back into the cabinet. "I don't do murder with cops on the way." He gestured to someone outside the door, and within seconds, he and his men were rushing out of the building. Tommy stared at Rena, his expression a mixture of anger and devastation. "Why did you do that? He was going to pay. I wanted to end this." Rena held her son's face between her hands. "I can't let you become a criminal, Tommy. I've already lost one child. I can't lose you, too." Tommy's eyes welled with tears, the tough facade crumbling to reveal the wounded boy beneath. "But as long as he's alive, we'll never be safe. You'll never be safe. I saw what he did to you last night. I've seen what he's capable of for years." "Listen to me," Rena said urgently, hearing sirens in the distance. "This stays between us. We tell the police we caught your father here using drugs. I'll show them the evidence I found, and you'll tell them everything that happened in Egypt, but you never paid anyone to harm your father. Do you understand me?" Tommy hesitated, conflict evident in his eyes. "But what if he tells them? What if those men talk?" "They won't," Rena said with more confidence than she felt. "They're long gone, and Jerome doesn't seem the type to confess to conspiracy charges." She squeezed his hands. "And who would believe Rick over us? He's been threatening and abusing us for years." Tommy nodded slowly, looking suddenly young and vulnerable. "Okay," he whispered. "Good. Now help me clean this place. We need to wipe down everything you and I touched." Together they quickly ran their sleeves over the chair, doorknob, and cabinet handles, anywhere fingerprints might have been left. As the sirens grew louder, Rena studied her son's profile, seeing both the child he had been and the man he was becoming. Despite everything, she felt a surge of fierce pride, not for the plan he had conceived, but for the love that had driven it. Tommy had been willing to sacrifice his freedom, his future, perhaps even his soul, to protect her. Police cars screeched to a halt outside the building, their lights casting red and blue shadows through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. "Remember," she whispered, "you were trying to save me, nothing more." Rena and Tommy stepped out of the pub just as police cars pulled up, their lights flashing against the building's grimy exterior. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, approaching cautiously. "My husband is inside," Rena called out, raising her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "Upstairs. He brought me here against my will." The officers approached, one of them holstering his weapon to speak with them while the others entered the building. "Ma'am, we received an emergency call from this location. Can you tell me what happened?" Rena nodded, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "My name is Rena Marlowe. My husband, Rick Marlowe, abducted me from our home and brought me here. I believe he intended to have me killed." As she spoke, more officers emerged from the building, escorting Rick and a scantily clad woman. Rick's face contorted with rage when he saw Rena and Tommy standing with the police. "This is a setup," he shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. "They're lying. Whatever they told you is a lie." The officer interviewing Rena ignored Rick's outburst. "We'll need both of you to come to the station to give formal statements," he said. Rena reached into her pocket, producing the photographs she had managed to grab before being forced from the house. "Officer, I found these hidden in our home today. They're from our family vacation in Egypt 10 years ago, the trip where my daughter disappeared." The officer examined the photos, noting the coordinates and phone number written on the backs. "We'll take these as evidence," he said, placing them in an evidence bag. Tommy stepped forward. "I was there," he said, his voice unexpectedly firm. "I was 10 years old when my father murdered my sister. He's been threatening and abusing me ever since to keep me quiet." Without warning, Tommy lifted his shirt, revealing a pattern of old scars across his back, evidence of systematic abuse that made Rena gasp in horror. She had never seen these marks before. Tommy had always been careful to change privately, even at home. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered, reaching for him. As Rick was being placed in a police car, he locked eyes with Tommy. "You think you're smarter than me?" he called out. "No, I'll make sure you end up behind bars, too." His gaze shifted to Rena. "This is a war zone now, and I'll defeat all my enemies." He spat toward them before being forced into the car, his final act of defiance making Rena flinch. She watched as the man she had married, the father of her children, transformed before her eyes into someone unrecognizable, a monster who had been hiding in plain sight for years. At the police station, Rick and the woman were processed through booking, while Rena and Tommy were taken to separate interview rooms. Detective Mercer, who had worked Lila's case from the beginning, joined Rena with a folder of notes. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, his expression grave, "I apologize for missing your call earlier. Tell me everything that happened today." Rena recounted finding the photographs, the coordinates to Gifton Island, and the phone number she believed belonged to someone Rick had paid to cover up Lila's death. She described Rick's violent reaction when he discovered she had found the photos, his abduction of her, and bringing her to the pub. "I believe he killed her based on what he implied and Tommy's statement," she concluded, her voice breaking. "I think Lila is buried somewhere on that island, and Rick paid someone to protect that secret." Detective Mercer nodded solemnly. "We'll coordinate with Egyptian authorities immediately. That phone number may lead us to whoever helped your husband." He paused, studying her face. "What I need to understand is how you ended up at that pub, and if your husband had paid those men to kill you, why hadn't they done so before we arrived? And how did your son know where to find you?" Rena carefully explained her version of events, leaving out Tommy's involvement with the men. "Tommy and I were supposed to have lunch together. He called me during my struggle with Rick, but the call ended abruptly. He must have suspected I was in danger. We have a family tracker app on our phones that we installed years ago when Lila disappeared. We rarely use it now, but it was still active." Detective Mercer frowned, making notes. "Something still doesn't add up, Mrs. Marlowe. I need you to tell me the whole truth." Before Rena could respond, there was a knock at the door. Another detective entered, his expression serious. "Tommy Marlowe has confessed everything," he announced. "He claims he knew his father had paid those men for prostitutes and potentially to kill his mother if she discovered the truth about what happened 10 years ago." The detective continued. "According to your son, he paid those men a higher price than his father, without Rick's knowledge. He asked them to kill Rick while he was with the woman because he didn't want him to hurt you anymore. He said he'd already lost his sister and couldn't bear to lose his mother, too." Rena's hands flew to her mouth. "No?" "He also said you stopped him because you didn't want him to become a murderer. The men apparently got away before we arrived." Tears streamed down Rena's face as she realized Tommy had chosen to tell the complete truth, not protecting himself as she had instructed. "Tommy also told us what happened 10 years ago," the detective added. "According to him, your husband had been abusing both children for years. The abuse continued until today. Rick never took the medications prescribed for his PTSD and was drinking heavily, which you partially knew about. But you were working most of the time and weren't home much. You trusted him and never suspected the extent of the abuse." Rena nodded, wiping away tears. "I should have known. I should have seen the signs." "Your son claims that on the day Lila disappeared, Rick had been drinking at a hotel bar. He returned to their room, took Lila with him, and when he came back later that night, Lila was gone. He threatened Tommy, saying if he ever told anyone, he would hurt both Tommy and you. Detective Mercer reached across the table, his voice gentle. "We'll coordinate with Egyptian authorities to find the man Rick paid. That person is likely the key to finding out what happened to Lila." "Whatever happened to her," Rena whispered, "I just hope her soul is at peace now and that Rick will receive the punishment he deserves." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "What about my son? What will happen to him?" "He'll be charged with conspiracy to commit murder," Detective Mercer said frankly. "But given the circumstances, the court might show leniency. The fact that he stopped short of actually committing the crime will work in his favor." Rena straightened, finding a new reserve of strength. "I've lived a bitter life for the past decade," she said. "But I'll plead with the judge for my son. He didn't go through with killing his father. He chose to be better, despite everything he's endured." Detective Mercer nodded. "That's fair. I hope justice will be served for all of you." He stood. "For now, we'll continue the investigation. Please wait outside while we process everything." Rena walked into the corridor, emotionally exhausted. Through a doorway, she saw Tommy being processed by an officer, his hands cuffed in front of him. Their eyes met across the room, hers filled with sorrow, his with a strange sort of peace, as if a terrible burden had finally been lifted. When the booking process was complete, an officer allowed Rena a brief moment with her son before they took him to a holding cell. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rena touched his face gently. "Thank you for saving my life," she said. "If you hadn't intervened, we'd all just be counting days until we ended up in the graves Rick had prepared for us." "I couldn't let him hurt you anymore," Tommy said simply. "Listen to me," Rena said firmly. "You didn't kill your father. You're not a murderer. And whatever he or anyone else says against you in court, I will believe you and testify for you. We're going to get through this, Tommy. Together." As the officer led Tommy away, Rena watched her son's straight back and raised head. Despite everything they had endured, Lila's disappearance, Rick's abuse, and the crushing weight of secrets, they had survived. The truth, painful as it was, had finally come to light. For the first time in 10 years, Rena felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate hope of finding Lila alive, but the quiet, steady hope that justice would prevail, that evil would be punished, and that she and Tommy might eventually find peace. Whatever lay ahead, trials, investigations, painful revelations, they would face it together. The long night of secrecy and suffering was finally giving way to the first pale light of truth.